Hey Laura, I'm gonna turn off my camera now and mute myself. I will give you a countdown and then just keep an eye out on those numbers below and you can start reading the script when they start ticking up. You got it, Laura. It's gonna be great. Okay, going live in 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Laura Chang, and I'm the Assistant Director of Institutional Gifts here at ProPublica. We're so pleased that you could join us today for this deep dive into Nonprofit Explorer for the donor community. We're going to wait a minute for a few more people to join us, and then we'll get started. A quick note that this event is being recorded, and a link to the video will be emailed to everyone who registered. Closed captioning of the program is also available and can be enabled by clicking on the closed caption option on the bar towards the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to ask a question during today's session, please click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to submit it to us. Okay, it looks like we have enough people on to get started. I'd like to introduce ProPublica President Robin Sparkman, who will kick off today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Laura. I appreciate it. So thank you all for coming today. We're delighted to see you. And thank you so much for supporting our work and for being ProPublica fans, or nerds, as we like to call everybody. So most of the time when we hold events, we talk about our work and the reporting that led to those stories. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. We want to talk with you about one of the tools or news applications or news apps, we call them, that we've created. And I know many of you are familiar with Nonprofit Explorer, but we wanted to do a deep dive on it today. And we created this database of Form 990s more than 10 years ago. And we recently gave it a top to bottom refresh. So we're very eager to talk about all the things that we've done. And for those of you who are super users of this, it should be, fun to learn about all the new features. And for those of you who aren't using the tool already, we'll make sure to talk through the basics. Now, one caveat. At ProPublica, we are all journalists or journalist adjacent. In my case, I'm a covering journalist, and we are not in a position to tell you whether one nonprofit is better than another. We are not the experts. Our job is to give you information so you can make that decision. So now I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Charlie Ornstein. He's a longtime healthcare reporter who is now our managing editor for Local. And Charlie wears many hats at ProPublica, including overseeing our news applications or news apps team. So Charlie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Robin. And it's great to be with you today. I am a huge fan of our news apps team and a big super user of the tools that they create. ProPublica is known for our news applications because they enable folks to take the data that we use as part of our stories in our journalism and look up stories that are relevant to them. This includes a tool we had close to the start of ProPublica called Dollars for Docs, which looked at pharmaceutical company payments to doctors, and to this day continues in the form of a tool that lets folks look up information on PPP loans, as well as nursing homes, and of course, Nonprofit Explorer. Nonprofit Explorer was launched, as Robin said, in 2013, and the goal was to give more visibility into nonprofits. I was kind of surprised by this, but nonprofits account for 5% of the US GDP and employ more than 12 million people. But many of the tools that were available to assess nonprofits actually required registrations, sometimes required paid registrations, and placed limits on users in terms of how much information they could get, how many forms that they could get for free. And we felt that there was a place to really democratize this information about nonprofit organizations. And so Nonprofit Explorer is entirely free to use and lets folks look up many, many years of information about nonprofit organizations all at one site. And with our latest refresh, as my colleague Ken will tell you in a bit, you can also sign up to subscribe to get updates when nonprofits post new forms called their 990 forms. So there are many, many different types of nonprofits, and my colleague will post a link in the chat to the various types of nonprofit organizations, but these include traditional 501c3s, which many of you, are familiar with, are the most, common type of nonprofit organization, the religious ones, educational, charitable, scientific. These are the nonprofits, often individuals, and foundations contribute funds to, but there are many others as well, including social and recreational clubs, labor organizations, teachers' retirement funds, and each of these organizations has a special relationship with the IRS in most cases in which they're exempt from certain types of taxes. Because of that, the IRS requires that they submit financial information to the IRS in the form of what's called an IRS 990 form. And an IRS 990 form is essentially akin to what we would submit to the IRS ourselves at 1040, but this is for nonprofit organizations. They have to submit these forms once a year, typically after their fiscal year closes, and different organizations have different fiscal years. And the information is generally, with the exception of a schedule related to their donors, information that is available to the public and what you'd find as part of our Nonprofit Explorer tool. A 990 form includes a whole lot of information about an organization's finances. In some ways, it's akin to corporations' annual reports that they file with the SEC if they're publicly traded, but it includes more detail than that. So you will find information about an organization's assets and liabilities, as well as their revenues and expenses, but you'll also find out information about their mission, about their governance, about their holdings, about the relationship that individual members of an organization have with the organization, and about compensation. And compensation is an area that a lot of people look to 990s for information on with respect to 990s. My colleague is going to post a couple links in the chat, which are helpful annotations of 990 forms that break down a 990 form in the various sections in the forms. I like to keep these in a bookmark because it can be confusing how much information is in a 990, and even for somebody who uses them all the time, I like to have these at my easy disposal. Not all nonprofits are required to file 990s. So religious organizations, churches in particular, are exempt from filing 990 forms that are publicly accessible. Similarly, organizations that have less than $50,000 in annual revenue file a postcard return. So you wouldn't find a complete 990 form. And then there are some that have to file it, but don't file it. And so you would see by using our tool if an organization has not filed a 990 form. Nonprofits set their own fiscal years. So one of the things to remember is that it can be difficult to compare one organization to another. If somebody's fiscal year ends, for example, in March, and another's fiscal year ends in December, both when they would file their 990 form, as well as what time period it would cover, would be different. So it's important to remember these are not just calendar years, they are fiscal years. And that's why what I try to do is understand when a fiscal year ends and when a 990 is due to be filed with the IRS. So in addition to the actual main form itself, nonprofits also have to file schedules that accompany their 990 form. My colleague's going to post a link to some information about what those schedules are, but it can be very, very helpful to understand the schedules. So the first is where they have to disclose their public support and information about their public charity status. That's Schedule A. The second is the one that I mentioned earlier, which is the schedule of contributors that many organizations don't have to keep public, and the IRS does not release it. An organization can, if it chooses to, make that information public. Their Schedule C is relating to political campaign and lobbying activities. Nonprofits that run schools are required to file what's called a Schedule E, and nonprofits that run hospitals are required to file what's called a Schedule H. You'll see another schedule that relates to activities outside of the United States, and that's called a Schedule F. Compensation, as I mentioned, which is one of the areas that people most look to the 990s, those details are included on what's called a Schedule J. And another thing that journalists look to is something called a Schedule L, which is where there's discussions about transactions that nonprofits have with interested persons, which could be their executives and board members. You'll see in the link that's posted in the chat that there are other schedules as well. I'm not going to go through all of them as well, but organizations that they apply to have the reporting obligations to submit this information to the IRS. And they also have an obligation to give them to you if you request for this information directly from the nonprofit. There is sometimes a lag between when information is submitted and when it is put online, although that lag has decreased. One thing I'll mention before I bring on my colleague Ken Schwenke is that ProPublica has been super active in not just making this information available on a timely basis, but also really interfacing with the IRS in ensuring that they release this information. There was a period of time when the IRS stopped releasing 990 information in digital format, which precluded people from doing research and due diligence into nonprofits. We were one of the leading players in terms of talking to the IRS and others in the government about how important it was to release this information. And I think in some part due to our advocacy, the IRS released more than 1 million nonprofit records all at once, which we've integrated into our Nonprofit Explorer, making it really such a comprehensive place to look for information on nonprofits. So I'm now going to ask my colleague Ken Schwenke, who is the editor of our news applications team and who has overseen the relaunch of Nonprofit Explorer, to come on and give a bit of a tour of our tool and what it can offer. Ken?
Thank you so much, Charlie. And thank you all for having me here to share with you one of my favorite things, which is Nonprofit Explorer. When I was on the team that I now run, I was asked to take over Nonprofit Explorer, and I remember saying quite clearly, I'm not interested in that. I don't know what interest I would have in nonprofit financial data. And I quickly grew to love it and started developing features for it. And now that I run it, we make sure it has, resources and is the best it can be. I'm going to share my screen real quick, and I'm going to give you a little overview of Nonprofit Explorer and how it works. So, there are many ways you can get to Nonprofit Explorer. You could Google it. Most of you, I assume, would know how to get to Publica's homepage. If you look in the top left right here, above our wonderful journalism, highly recommend you read the story or watch it as a video. You can click this green button right here that takes you to Nonprofit Explorer. You can see that the main feature that we have of Nonprofit Explorer sort of front and center is search. And I will get to that in a minute. We really wanted to, in this revamp, Nonprofit Explorer, we heard from many people. We reached out to a bunch of people who had been big users. A lot of people told us our search was not up to par. Our search was, they would use Google instead of using our actual search on Nonprofit Explorer. And we have hopefully revamped this and made it a much more useful search experience. But you can see we give some breakdowns and overviews here. The number of active nonprofits, nearly 2 million. There are more than 18 million tax filings that we have accessible in the database, and $3.6 trillion worth of revenue. We have a breakdown by state for the most recent year, showing you the highest salary in that state and the total revenue for that state for the most recent filing years. I will get to this part in a minute as well. And if you go to the bottom of each page, there is some information about where we get the data. So you can get the raw data yourself should you need to, because we believe in sharing this information that we have gathered up and hard won over the years, as well as sort of explaining more about which organizations are here and the kinds of nonprofits that we show. I'm going to show you a state page real quick. I'll go to New York because that's where I am. And just to sort of show you some of the aggregate information that we show you the highest revenue nonprofits in New York. You'll see most of them are universities and healthcare related. I believe there's a trust or two in here as well. And if you go down a little further, we show you the highest earning nonprofit employees in New York. So you can see there's, the American Museum of Natural History, hospitals, universities, and things like that. Interestingly, New York is not the place where you'll find the highest salaries, as many athletic foundations for universities are nonprofits. You'll find football coaches at the University of Florida, where I went to school. You'll see an $18 million payment for when they recently fired their football coach, which sort of brings me to a thing about looking at the compensation data, which is that the compensation data can be a little misleading. So if I look at this one, the highest compensation here, it would be Ellen Sutter, who was the president of the American Museum of Natural History, and you click into it. First, you can see from the page we have here, we have some summary information about the Museum of Natural History, some charts charting its revenue, expenses, total assets, and liabilities over time. And then the other sort of centerpiece that we do is the extracted information here. So we have sort of like top line information about contribution, expenses, revenue, royalties, fundraising, and things like that. And we also break out compensation here. And when you look here at the compensation, the $11 million compensation, sometimes I find it's best to scroll down a few times and see whether that compensation looks markedly different from previous years. And you can see that it really is. And, having done this many times, and I'm sure many of you will probably be jumping out of your seats to explain to me that this is probably deferred compensation. And, one way of finding that is to go to the schedule. So you can either view the full filing of a 990 here, or you could jump directly to one of those schedules that Charlie mentioned. You could also, if you're an expert, we actually have the data behind this, the sort of coded data that we download from the IRS and we render into these filings, as well as any audits for organizations that spend more than $750,000 in federal grant money. But because I know that compensation is on Schedule J, if I wanted to double check the reason for that compensation, I would sort of scroll down to here, verify that compensation information, and then I would read here in the supplemental information, which are on many forums, that this is deferred compensation over a 30-year period for that specific person. I'm also going to, now I want to show you some of the search before I get back into those features of a nonprofit's page. I'm going to use Columbia University because I know it shows a lot of interesting flags that we pull out of nonprofits. When you go to search for something, you'll see that there are a couple of different ways you can search. You can search by a nonprofit's name. You can search people's names if they are key employees or board members. And you can search the full text of any electronically filed filing. We do not and have not yet gone back and extracted information from the old paper, the PDF filings. But for every filing that has come in electronically, which all filings must now, you can search the full text of all of those filings to find anything you want on them. I'm just going to use the nonprofit search right now, and I'm going to look directly for a nonprofit. You'll see that's relatively easy. It comes up right here, and I will click into that. And I want to show you a little bit more about one of these pages. You can see, again, we have the same kind of information, but you'll also see a couple of things here that we've extracted out of its most recent filing. So we tell you that Columbia has, Columbia in 2022 reported that it operated a donor advised fund. And we give you a little bit more information about that, telling you that if you wish to view more information about it, you can check Schedule B. We can tell you quite obviously that it operated a school. We would hope so. We'll also tell you that it provided first class or charter travel to key employees and officers. And you'll see that that is on Schedule J if you want more information. And you can also see that whether it reported conflict of interest transactions, which are things like loans, grants, or other business transactions which with key employees or officers and things like their family members or any businesses that they may hold a controlling interest in. And those are on Schedule L. And so if you take a look at these flags, you'll see that they match to these filters that we have on the side here, which means that not only do we show you in the most recent filing and also any previous filing information like this, we also allow you to filter to find any other organization that may, say, operate a donor advised fund. And again, when you look at this page, you can get the summary information, you can jump to the filings, or if you wanted to investigate any of those things that we had flagged, you could then pull in and say, go to the Schedule L and see what the conflict of interest transactions that Columbia reported were. From here too, we really prioritize being able to view the full filings of things. And so you can jump to any other schedule from here. You can also print this off or save it as a PDF, which we find people have always really wanted to do. And you can also subscribe. This is one of our brand new features in Nonprofit Explorer, which is if you click on this and you enter your email address, anytime we get new tax filings or audits for the organization you subscribe on, we will send you an email. This happens about once, at most twice a year for any given nonprofit, and you can subscribe to up to 200 nonprofits. That is a free service that we provide. This is all free. There's no registration unless you want to sign up for an email, and even then, we only ask for your email address. The difference between Nonprofit Explorer and some of our competitors, as Charlie said, is that we believe that this information should be free, easily researchable. We aim it towards journalistic ends for the most part, but we hope that as many people can get use out of this as humanly possible. Organizations like GuideStar, Foundation Center, I believe which are all candid at this point, or some of the other nonprofit sites, they not only ask for registration, but often they ask for paid accounts to access some of those services, including full text search. There are things that those sites do better than us. So specifically, if you are a grant maker, those sites will allow you to say download and look only at sets of grants, and they try to really sort of aim their services, at being able to identify organizations that way. However, you can still do some of that using Nonprofit Explorer itself. I, may want to know who has donated, given a grant to Columbia, for example. Or actually, I'm going to use the University of Florida Foundation, which is, again, the school I went to. And I'm going to look at the full filing text of here. So right now, what you're seeing is any filing in these years from 2013 to 2022 that mention the University of Florida Foundation. If I wanted to restrict this to just grants, I can actually go here and check off only the granting schedule, which is Schedule I believe. But I could filter this search down to any given schedule on the 990. So if I wanted to find it anywhere on the Schedule A or the Schedule J, I could do that as well. I can restrict it to a year, and I can also restrict it to a state. So if I want to see anybody, any nonprofit located in the District of Columbia that gave a grant to the University Foundation in 2022, I can just click those off and I can hit apply. And this would be theoretically some of these organizations. One thing is that we do search a little bit more than just the text itself, so a little more than the exact phrase. So much like in Google search, if you want the exact phrase, you want to put quotes around the University of Florida Foundation, and then I will recheck the years I wanted. So we'll do 2021, and we'll do Schedule I. And now this is just grants given to the University of Florida Foundation in 2021. If you want to read one of those, say the Gainesville Quarterback Club, you can pop that open and you can take a look and you can get the details of the grant. You can see that there was a $12,000 grant for contributions for scholarships given by this organization in 2021 to that specific foundation. There are other things that we can do. You can see you can just click over in this tab if you wanted to search this exact text in something else. You can also just clear this out and explore the data on its own. So if you go back to the homepage and you can just click this search box right here, you'll actually be browsing all of the organizations. And so if I, for example, wanted to take all of the organizations and filter them down, again, let's do organizations in Florida that operated a hospital and let's say provided first class or charter travel, I can filter those down and hit apply. And I can take a look at the 22 organizations that operate hospitals in Florida that provide first class or charter travel. I can further refine that down to find very large ones in the $2 billion to $50 billion category, or I can find smaller ones in the $50 million to $200 million category. I can also take a look at other nonprofit categorizations like recreation and sports and explore that from there. From there, there is one other thing I want to show you, which is the people search. I am going to search for a famous person. Some of you may know, and I'm going to search for Donald J. Trump in the people search. Donald J. Trump, it turns out, was a board member at the New York Police Athletic League, taking no compensation in these years. But you also see that he was the president of the Donald J. Trump Foundation, which we all know he can no longer operate anymore in the state of New York. And you see his son as well was a board member at Smile Training. When available, we show the compensation for these people when you search for, when you use the people search. And then again, you can open the filing if you wish and see more information that may be available on the actual filing itself for that person. You can also, again, search that name. You can use some filters here as well. So you can restrict it to a state. You only see it in New York. You could restrict to compensation bands. Because we are only looking at Donald J. Trump and he takes zero, the only filter here is $0 to $10,000. But if you were searching for different kinds of names, there would be more possible filter bands here, more states and more years that you could filter down to. But if you're searching for like a kind of person at an organization, you can use the people search. Again, you can also search the full text of any filing for any nonprofit that may have, say, granted to the Donald J. Trump Foundation. Again, if you wanted to keep that specific to that, you could filter down to the Schedule I and only see those. And most likely, again, you'll want to put quotes around it and do it that way. This is, because we're on more than the schedule here, you'll see that this is, some of these are advertising in opposition to Donald J. Trump and things like that. There's lots of weird and interesting things you see by looking at the full text of all of these. With that, I think that may be the bulk of it. If you want more information on how to do searches here, we have on the homepage this little advanced search link that you can click that'll give you more information. There's actually one other thing I've always liked to take a look at when I'm doing this, which is that may be useful for all of you, which is that something we do in reporting and something you all may want to do is look at fundraising information. And one of the most famous fundraising operations is the Met Gala every year. So if you look up the Metropolitan Museum of Art and you go down to their Schedule G, which is the fundraising schedule, you can see how much money the Costume Institute, which is the official name for the Met Gala, took in, and you can see other information about that. You can also look to see how much money their telemarketing and other consultants take in, which is another interesting thing that we do journalistically all the time. And I believe that's my time. Thanks, everybody.
Ken, thank you so much. I've always wondered about the Met Gala, and I appreciate your sharing this very important need-to-know information. So we're now going to turn things over to the Q&A portion. Please put any questions you have for us and for the team in the Q&A area here. We also would appreciate it if you would click on the link at some point. We have a little survey about the event today. We take our feedback on events seriously, and we adjust future events based on what we hear. So I'm going to go ahead and take the first question to Charlie or to Ken, whoever wants to take this. How are most people finding and or using Nonprofit Explorer?
Yeah, most people find it when there's a bunch of people who go specifically to Nonprofit Explorer. The number of people who tell me they bookmark it and use it all the time is a lot, and one of the reasons we continue to improve it. But if you look at our actual metrics, it's usually people looking up the name of a nonprofit and maybe the word 990 or other sort of financial terms with it, and we rank relatively high in Google search for a lot of those terms.
Okay, great. And do you want to tell us, why did we decide to do this in the first place?
Charlie, you were here. I was not here when we first published this.
Yeah, I think we always have an interest in making things, if we see an opening where information that is really important to people isn't easily accessible, we decide to take that project on. And we are committed to keeping going on it as long as the information is not easily accessible. And we really found this to be an area that people were stumbling around in the dark a bit to find out information on nonprofits. There was a man named Carl Malamud who had been sending FOIA requests to the IRS. This is before the IRS released this information digitally. And every year or so, he would seek the information of their 990s on a disk, and they would send him a disk with thousands of 990 forms, and he uploaded them onto a server. And I think at some point he connected with us and asked if we wanted to take over that function. So the accessibility of these disks combined with our interest in making information more easily available, I think found a loving home together.
Yes, I want to add to that too. Carl actually I believe he won a lawsuit against the IRS to make these public, so they had to publish them. We used to get flash drives every month from the IRS that somebody had to spend hours sort of like shoveling onto the internet. When I took over, I did not want to do that, and so I took to hounding the IRS over and over and over again to release the information in digital format, and finally they did. Other people were more involved than that, but I was a real thorn in their side to get those PDFs online so that we could get more information than just the data that we have.
I'm glad we made your life easier and provided this enormous public service at the same time. Okay, so another question for you folks. How often do we update Nonprofit Explorer?
We update it about once a month. The IRS releases 2 sort of tranches of information. They're way behind on PDFs. So the way the information gets to us, for the most part, is the IRS releases these digital files. Remember, I showed you this like XML data looking part, and they release that on a relatively regular schedule now. And we load that in once a month. They also update the sort of index of nonprofits once a month, but they are very behind on updating the PDFs. Because the way we render the data into filings, like these sort of searchable ones that I was showing you, it's not a huge problem because everybody needs to e-file at this point, but there are some documents that we're missing because the IRS is behind on PDF. But the answer to that is once a month.
And you talked about how our search internal engine for this was not up to par. And so we addressed that. And just what is the thinking behind some of the other changes in the refresh?
It hadn't gotten a redesign in a very long time. It didn't feel very modern at the time. And sort of selfishly, I just wanted it to look better. I was sort of sick of looking at the same thing day in, day out. But some of the other features, like pulling out some of the flags, like those are things that we think about journalistically. Those are questions that we have, like, did they report conflicts of interest? Did they report that maybe somebody stole from them, or that they provide private jet travel, or the charts, right? Being able to see the data over time. These are things we found ourselves doing and people that we talked to doing sort of in their heads, or wanting to look for and wishing there were an easier way to do it. And so we sort of made sure that there were ways of doing that were much easier.
Charlie, if you had to hazard a guess, how much does it cost to maintain and manage Nonprofit Explorer? And then can you talk about how important it is to our reporting?
Absolutely. I would say hundreds of thousands of dollars at minimum for the staff time, the server capacity, the effort that we put into gather Ken's work with the team. So it is a huge amount of cost and a huge amount of effort for us to maintain this and commit to keeping it updated once a month. If we stopped updating it, it would begin to immediately lose its value, and so we want to ensure that it preserves that. And your second question, Robin, I'm sorry.
Can you talk about how we use it in reporting? I mean, maybe a couple examples of some stories where it's helped.
Absolutely. So we wrote a story last year that involved a health sharing ministry that I think in part came to our attention by using the nonprofits. This was a health insurance plan that's a Christian sharing ministry that was registered as a nonprofit, but was not acting in the most wholesome ways according to some of its members. And so we wrote a story about that. We've written about art museums, for example, that when one has an art museum, it has to be open to the public and not just for the benefit of the person who owns it. And so Nonprofit Explorer was a tool we used in terms of internally in doing research on the foundations that had their own art museums, which weren't open to the public very often. So that's just to name a couple, but there are other stories that we have underway right now where Nonprofit Explorer is proving extremely handy.
Mm-hmm. What can you say about journalists outside of ProPublica? You know, I know that both Ken and Charlie field a lot of questions from other news organizations. Any thoughts on how other news organizations use our database in the past, and maybe talk a little about reporting, what we call reporting recipes?
Sure. So not a day goes by when we don't see clips of other news organizations using Nonprofit Explorer. It's actually a real point of pride that it's not just doesn't just power our journalism, but powers journalism of our colleagues all across the country. Last year, Ken and the news application developer who worked on this project, Andrea, and I had a wonderful reporting recipe call with journalists from across the country to talk about how you can use Nonprofit Explorer for investigative journalism. And to your point, Robin, these reporter recipe calls are just vital to what we do. It's a way of us sharing information and helping folks to do similar stories to what ProPublica staff do, taking the knowledge we've gained and sharing it with others. But the stories come to bear, you know, when you find nonprofits who are having financial difficulties or have appeals for the public. People will go and look up the nonprofit in Nonprofit Explorer. If there's a major fundraising effort, you'll find that in Nonprofit Explorer. If you find efforts to look once a year at compensation of, say, hospital executives in particular markets, people will use Nonprofit Explorer for that. Ken, what am I missing?
I mean, you've got most of it down. I hear from researchers at the New York Times and the Washington Post who, like, the biggest researchers, you know, the best researchers in the business, email us to tell us, you know, that this tool has been invaluable in their work. When I go to journalism conferences, you know, people are like, oh my God, I love Nonprofit Explorer. I use it all the time. And, you know, not only do I see it cited in like investigative reporting about things, but sometimes I will see a story and I get a little hunch. You know, it says, you know, this nonprofit or like this organization was funded by, and I will go and I will email that reporter and I go, did you use the full text search to find who funded that nonprofit? And they'll be back, yes. I have never gotten a no yet. So the full text search is really powerful to be able to do that.
Okay. So I only have time for another question or two. And just a reminder, please fill out our event survey and we will send everyone a copy of this recording as well as the links that you saw in the chat earlier. We know this is a lot of information to obtain all at once. Charlie, question for you. I know you alluded a little bit to our news apps, you know, our I call them our tools for the layman. And there's a question is, what are some of the other most used tools? Do you want to just do a couple quick highlights on those?
Sure. So in the middle of COVID, there was a program called the PPP loan program where the government paycheck protection program and ProPublica used the data the government released and created a lookup tool for some of the largest recipients of PPP loans and whether they were forgiven. And that tool remains a popular one today. Another one that is popular is our tool that really makes it much easier to search information about nursing homes across the country. We refreshed this tool last year as well. And so you're able to see how nursing homes compare to one another, particularly in terms of the deficiencies that government inspectors have found. And that's really, really valuable because, you know, nursing homes house about 1 million people across the United States. And as we all have been in situations, I think, where we've had friends or family members who've been in a pretty urgent situation to look for a home, and you want to be sure that information is available when you need it. Most people don't need it every day, but when you do need it, we want to be sure that it's up to date, that it's actionable, and that people can find out information about the homes they're considering.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ken and Charlie, for all your time today. I'm going to close things out and turn things back to my colleague, Laura Chang. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I wanted to thank the team for their time, as well as our audience for joining us and for all of your thoughtful questions. Again, this discussion has been recorded, and you'll receive an email with the full video of today's event. and a link to our event survey is in the chat box. We appreciate your feedback on that. And from all of us at ProPublica, thank you so much for joining us today and for your generous support of our work. We appreciate it. Thanks again and have a great afternoon.